No problem. As long as you touch us up later, make us look good in Photoshop.
All right. Luckily, I do have a production team ready, and they're gonna touch up,
Yeah.
up and down.
They better be good. They better be good, Prakash. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
All right. Everyone, welcome. The usual rules which we do is typically we go on a gallery view as opposed to a speaker view, because you don't want to see only one face. You want to see like all the people who have joined. As much as we love looking at the faces of the authors, our lovely guests, we also love seeing who else has been joining us a lot. And a lot of us have been making new friends in this group. So seeing the face, I can see Lachijar out there. I know by now, okay, I know what he's doing. I can see Deepti, and so does everybody else. So we encourage us all to go on a gallery view. We encourage a lot of private DMing, private chit-chatting to each other, saying, oh, Louise is a bit too much today. And like Prakash is just being an arrogant jerk today. Whatever you want to write down, and like Jez is looking handsome. And whatever it is that you want to have an internal chat about, right? And April is like, okay, why are you guys not mentioning me, right? Whatever it is that you're going to want to like chat about, please feel free to have your internal DMs. The good thing is the internal DMs do not get recorded when we record the videos, right? So those chats are just yours.
Yeah.
Beyond those, all chats in the group box, they do get recorded with the videos, and typically we try to upload transcripts also. The reason for that is you have those questions which are really, really interesting. People put up questions out here. So starting right now, please start putting up questions whenever you feel like, whatever occurs to you guys. At some point of time into this live chat free flow session, Louise is gonna pick up questions. Sometimes what happens is the speakers themselves are like, okay, I like that particular question. So that happens too. As we start with it, all of us will be on mute, I think, except for our guest to begin with. Like you all know, there are no rules out here. It's just pretty much, there's no agenda apart from talking about behavioral science. And we always get lucky because we always end up with some fantastic folks. And for some reason, they just want to come and talk about their work to people like us. We're like, okay, tell us more, tell us more. Today we are lucky. We got Jez, we got April. And welcome, Jez, April. What we want to know, and we will talk about Ripple. Right? Why the name Ripple? I think the first question is also going to be that. But before we talk about why the name Ripple, April, we would like to invite you to tell us a little bit about who is April, what does she do, and how did you get into behavioral science? What has been your journey? We'll start with that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, Prakash. Yeah, who is April? It's always easier sometimes to reflect on someone else, isn't it? I wonder whether Jez would be better to say who is April. But I got into behavioural science like I know a lot of people begin by studying psychology at undergrad. So I actually started off doing a maths degree at St Andrews, and I minored in psychology, and it's just, one of those things you just find you're more drawn to one thing than the other. I never wanted to do the maths assignments, but I was always so excited about psychology. So I kind of followed my heart and switched to doing that full time. And I found it fascinating, bored all my friends with it, senseless, whenever we were at the pub, just, there's this one study that found that blah, blah, and people would just kind of zone out a bit. But yeah, then when I graduated, the field of applied behavioural science, it wasn't really taking off. It was actually probably only taking off London, as I saw it with Jez and his practice at Ogilvy. So it was kind of in the really, really early stages of adoption, and there weren't that many jobs in applied behavioural science. So then I went to work in the world of advertising, which is kind of similar in a way, I guess, kind of trying to nudge people to do something, but it tends to be nudging people to buy something. So it's not always the most fulfilling way of using your skills. So then I was really excited to go back to university to study behaviour change at University College London, and it was the very first year that this degree was being run. So I did that in its inaugural year with another of our colleagues at Cowrie Consulting called Ella, and then we were both lucky enough to happen upon Cowrie Consulting and get hired by Jez, and the rest has been a roller coaster ride of a couple of years of just straight on the ground, hit the ground running, helping clients with applying behavioural science. And then one day in the office, Jez was talking about how he'd been approached to write a book, and he was talking about getting a ghostwriter. And I kind of jokingly said to him, "I'll help you write it, Jez." And he latched onto that idea, and then we made it happen.
Well, thank you. Now we all know who is April. And fantastic. We're going to ask Jez the same question in a couple of minutes. Who is Jez, right? Which we do to almost all of our speakers. Who are you? Can you tell us about you? It is more for us to let people know from their perspective how our speakers see themselves, how they identify themselves. There's one question more that we're going to ask. I think people want to know, April, who was April before she became a behavioral science specialist, before she became a choice architect, I think at Cowrie Consulting, before she became this writer who wrote this really amazing book, which connects behavioral science, UK, Scotland, Thailand, Mexico, and a lot more. So is there something you want to talk or share about the time before you became this really fantastic behavioral specialist?
Well, yeah, the thing that jumps to mind when you say that is it was funny going to this wedding at the weekend, because it was all these friends from university, from St Andrews, and everyone just remembers me as the girl who DJ'd at all the nights and stuff. So that was me before coming to London and getting a grown-up job, was DJing all the local uni club nights, which wasn't very cool in this tiny little seaside town in Scotland, but that's how other people see me sometimes.
So we are lucky today that we have two authors instead of one, and because we have been this lucky, I think it's going to be one. What was it that prompted you to write the book with Jez? Like, why not someone else? We get the point that you guys are colleagues, but was there beyond something just being colleagues, something beyond that, because of which is, what, I think this is the person we should write a book together with.
Do you want to take that one, Jez? I can.
Yeah, no, I think if you answer that, I think.
Okay.
It's an interesting one, because it was kind of I'd kind of put my hand up for it, but then you just had faith and you were kind of like, yeah, let's let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm a great believer in jumping into something with both feet, and April had done some writing previous to that, so it wasn't brand new. So, she was an insight writer, a research, sort of a behavioural science research, and done some work there. And obviously I'd seen her at work and seen her perform. So I was particularly confident, I think. I suppose the stories are quite personal. So I think being able to be really relaxed with somebody, and April did an amazing job. I think it means that she really pulled the stories out. And then also having a behavioural science writer, I think, really made a difference, because there wasn't any translation that was required, apart from my poor language and northern accent, maybe. But apart from that, I think that was a key difference. I think if we had gone for a ghostwriter, there would have been a lot of, what do you mean by that? I don't understand that. Whereas April sort of intuitively knew what those things were.
Okay, thank you so much, Jez. I think it's very weird now, but we're still going to ask it. Who is Jez? For all the people who have joined us and who may not be aware of your work with Cowrie and who have not read your book as yet.
So my background is I've been in, I suppose, consulting type services, professional services for 30 years, predominantly in advertising for 25. But then got fascinated by, I suppose, behaviour change. And I was doing some work with government clients. I think a lot of behaviour change then was predominantly communication based. But then there started to be some interesting work coming out of some of the agencies around sort of physical products that can help people deal with smoking cessation, and then some interesting stuff around change for life and obesity. So that kind of started to think, well, this is a thing like behavioural change. And then I sort of read everyone was reading all the pop sociology and pop economics type stuff, and I think Gladwell is brilliant. So he made a whole genre accessible and fun to read and interesting. I'm not one of those people that see it as pop. I just think it's incredibly beautifully written. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to go for it. And there wasn't any courses then. So it is quite interesting because I don't have a formal psychology degree. And everyone says, well, you can't practice until you got a degree. But the fact of the matter was, when I started doing behavioural science, there weren't any behavioural science modules or courses or university places. So they didn't exist. So essentially it was psychology and then clinical psychology. So, and then what was really interesting was we got a brief from the Department of Health before it became Public Health England. And the brief was, could you audit our work over the last sort of 3 years, working with Professor Paul Dolan. He'd just written Mindspace with Dominic and Ivo. And we worked on the Mindspace framework and audited their programs, and then designed some for the future. And that was in 2010. So that was before Cameron got in and the nudge unit was formed. So practicing was quite early. And then I left that business then to work with Rory at Ogilvy to see if you could create a practice, because I think up until then, nudge or behavioral science, it wasn't really a thing. It was a thing in a book, but it wasn't really a real thing. So so we then started to figure out how you might be able to do it. And I suppose that's the content for Ripple really, was trying to essentially take what was largely academic theory and studies done in universities to put them out into the real world and see if people believed they worked, they were happy to pay for them, or give resources to them. And it was fabulous. It was a very, very enjoyable period. We made a lot of mistakes, and I've written about them, a lot of them in the book. And we learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun. And then did that for 4 years. Created Nudge Doc. So kind of I remember the first one of those in Deal. So we kind of did some really interesting things with the team. But I had a yearning to have my own business again. And there's some things that I couldn't do at Ogilvy within a WPP advertising agency sort of background. I couldn't really do there. So we formed Cowrie nearly 5 years ago now. Started off with 3 people, and we're now, I think, up to 24. So we just hired 4 more people, literally in the last week. So it's been a lot of fun, and I think we've got a lot of momentum. Sort of COVID aside, there's a lot of momentum. So that's kind of me. And then personally, I just love, I love being entrepreneurial. And entrepreneurial, my definition is creating jobs for younger people than me. So I'm 50. So I just love it when we hire people, and allow them to pursue their dreams and passions. It's an amazing feeling. So that's what that really gets me. So that's who is Jez, I think.
Well, thank you so much, Jez. That's a lovely story. There was something interesting that you said as you started talking about you, and I think we will just ask that question straight away. It's a question that we have not really asked so far, but you have a fantastic background, a fantastic story. You said something about not having the PhD or the formal education. And in this group where there are almost 2,000 people that are there as a part of this club, one of the discussions that is there privately in chats and also out there is people sometimes feel there are two sides to it. One is the academic side where someone has put down 6 years, 8 years earning a PhD, or 2 years, 1 year earning a master's degree in behavioral science, writing paper, right? And on the other side, there are practitioners who are straight up. All it takes today, right now, is I think 3 seconds to change your profile to behavioral consultant or behavioral scientist on LinkedIn. And I can totally imagine if you are a PhD person who has put down 6, 7 years of your life, figuring out, doing all your RCTs and slugging and making changes while your professor rejects it, to see that and get a bit upset saying, well, you know what, I think there has to be a certain standard. But I also understand the other side of the debate, which says, yes, but a poet does not need to go to a school to write poems. Freud did not study psychology to become he didn't do a PhD in psychology. I hope I'm right out here. Neither did Picasso go to a school and learn cubism. And they said, now I'll do cubism. He started it, right? So there is the other side of the discussion also. And I always feel that there has to be a nice balance between, I think, people keep on saying a lovely balance between academia and application. The good thing here is you are also someone who teaches, I think at the UCL, if I'm not mistaken, Jez. What is your take on this whole debate, or is there a debate there at all?
Yeah, I sit on the faculty at City University, in an applied sense. So we have a number of things that we do. So we do lectures which are more applied. We help with some of the MSc students. We've got 2 that we're helping with at the moment with client-related projects. But yeah, I mean, I think PhDs are amazing, right? So I think masters, postgrads, I think they're amazing things. If someone says to me, I don't think you should be doing it, I kind of go, okay, that's fine. That's your view. If they say, I don't think Cowrie is professional because I don't have a degree, I'd say, well, there's 22 out of the 24 of us that have all those degrees. So what's your problem? So for me, it's like, it's not a reflection on our business. If someone wants to sort of, I suppose, say, I'm cleverer than you because I've got a PhD, I do have a problem. I think a PhD is an amazing thing, but I don't think it necessarily means that you're cleverer than everybody else. And I don't think professors are cleverer than everybody else. I think they've decided to focus on a particular discrete, narrow sort of field of work and achieve excellence. And it's amazing. But to think that you're clever is just, to me is really, really quite a strange concept. And that's what I do find a little bit kind of worrying sometimes when I follow that narrative. So I think that's particularly sort of dangerous because I think there's a lot of people, that myself included, I could have stayed on and done a PhD if I wanted to in biochemistry. I got first class honours, so I could have done that. I chose not to, and shoe on the other foot would just be, it's fine if you've been practicing academia and you've got a PhD and you think that that's essentially the qualification you need, which might be like 3 years of worth deep study or whatever. I'd say, well, you can't practice in business then. You most probably need to do 4 or 5 years worth of consulting in business before, do an MBA before you can come into my world, because my world is like we talk about in Ripple, it's quite a different world. So and I have a very, very simple view that if the work that you do changes behaviour in an ethical way, a sustained way, and a way that is for good, then I don't think it really matters or cares, does it? I've got a PhD, but all my interventions are rubbish and they don't work. Okay, brilliant. For me, so that's it. And I'm a great believer in meritocracy based, and I think So for me, if you contribute and you deliver, then that's great. And anybody that sees it differently, fine, that's their view, but it's certainly not mine. So I think there's room for everybody. Would be kind of my thought.
Thank you, Jez. And before I invite in Michael for taking over the entire session with his questions, and I can see him smiling, and I can see like some 40 books on itself. My oh my, I'm jealous, man. Before we go and hand it over to Michael, April, you have a formal education in psychology, and we just had a discussion, and you heard Jez's answer. You guys work together, And a lot of people out here are entrepreneurs, are marketeers, and a lot of us are not, right? Uh, is there something that you can give us as an advice? Because you see both sides of it. You work with someone who doesn't have a formal training, but is one of the best behavioral scientists in the whole world and is teaching youngsters how to apply, or how is teaching them in the college about it. And on the other side, you have your own background, your own work that you guys have done, and a fantastic book between the two of you. What would be your advice to people who are here, who have absolutely zero background? I think for many of us, Ripple is going to be the first book that is going to introduce us to this wonderful world of behavioral science. What advice do you have for us?
Well, I think it is a really interesting distinction, because there's a very different skill set, I think, that you get from an academic grounding in psychology and behavioral science to what you get in the applied world and in the kind of business context. Because when you're learning how to design an intervention in an academic context, there's very little room for things like creativity, and it's all about proving one kind of principle in an as controlled environment as possible. And so what you end up being very good at when you're trained with an academic hat on is doing something in a very controlled environment, which isn't really like the real world at all. And then you go and try and do something in the real world, and you don't have as much time, you might not have as much budget, you might have some restrictions on what you can and can't say, like tone of voice guidelines and all these things. And so it becomes a very different skill set entirely. And I think what was interesting for me was I was trying to get a lot of guidance when I was doing masters about whether a PhD would be right for me, or whether to go straight into actually doing it. And I think unless you're super, super fascinated in one tiny area of behavioural science, it kind of going down that 4-year route of dedicating every waking hour to one thing, it becomes quite limiting and quite isolating. And I was just keen to go out and get out there and start doing it, start applying all and stuff. And I definitely learned more in my first year working at Cowrie than I did in a whole year of doing masters, even though it's brilliant and all of those academics were absolutely amazing and brilliant, but it's just a complete different skill set. Did that answer the question? The question was, what advice would you give to, is it the question, would you advise going and getting the academic grounding, or just jumping straight in?
It does help us a lot. I think more than anything, it gives a lot of confidence to a lot of us out here in different degrees. People who are pursuing their PhD, they know this is not something that goes away because everybody else is jumping in the field. A PhD is legit. It takes a lot of work to get one. And there is an entire world out there for the ones from PhD, but the ones who love it and are overwhelmed with the thought of going for a master's and then PhD, with Jez's example and with your story, they look at say, you know what, I think I can study it, I can find a way to implement it. I can see there are some marketeers here in the audience tonight and some people who are MBAs from one of the best colleges in India. That's my college. I am Bangalore. Shout out to them a lot. So what happened is it's really good for us because we all now know that we can try out something as long as we go with the approach of experimenting. I think that's the takeaway we'll take from what you have said. It's about experimenting. Even people who are not marketeers or advertisers can start experimenting in their real life. Like, let me cut the line and say, can I cut the line because my mom is sick? Some reason. Are people more willing to help me out if I give a reason, or if I just say, maybe give no reason? Can I cut the line, please? Are you okay if I do this before you? What percentage of people ask me saying, why should you, right? So I think we all can start experimenting in life. Thank you so much. Guys, please start writing all your questions. Please do put them in the chat box. Michael is gonna be taking over from here. Louise is here, I am here. Michael, please introduce yourself and then it's all yours, brother.
Thank you, Prakash. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So I'm just an obsessive learner. That's how I found this group, and I just read a lot of books, and I review a lot of them. I reviewed Jez's and April's book on my YouTube channel, and I attended the Nudge Stock Festival as well, and I did a review of that. So I'm just always just constantly gathering information and then trying to put it into a digestible format and then put it out there on the internet. So I think that's kind of how I sort of started linking up with various different people and found my way into this group as well from Nudge Stock. And so I had a few questions about the not only the contents of the book, April and Jez, but also the process of writing it as well. I didn't actually know this, but I spoke to Louise, and she said apparently you had a whole process around writing it called Book in a Box. And so I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about the entire process of writing the book, how you even decided what the chapters would be, the structures. The structure is very interesting, the way you have that glossary at the beginning, and then you kind of drop these behavioral science principles in as the book continues on its journey. So I'd be very interested in just hearing about how all of that came to fruition.
Sure. Well, it was interesting to begin with the kind of structure of the chapters themselves. We were quite led by our publisher on that one. So Jez was lucky enough to be approached by our publisher, who are called Harriman House, and they do a lot of business books, and they knew from having produced a lot of books that the things that did well were ones that had kind of key takeaways, so kind of the story, some kind of case study, and then the learnings from it. So it was kind of really easy to then apply that to your working life. So we were quite led on that structure by them. But when it came to doing a structure for the whole book and writing the whole thing, the book in a box method was really, really interesting, actually. So I was telling Louise about the guys in America, and I think they're based in America, and they've come up with this method to help anyone who's got a book in their head somewhere to get it out onto paper so that it can be published. And it almost feels like cheating, because it feels like such an easy process. Well, I think it worked really, really well for us. And it can, I think it could work for anyone, even if you didn't have a writing partner. So the idea is that you choose your topic, something that you know inside out, and once you've kind of got a structure for the type of things you want to talk about, you get somebody to basically interview you on those topics. So you've got the stories in your head, and you get someone to basically ask you all of the questions needed to like tease all of those stories and those insights out, and you record what you're saying, and then you can pay a transcription service to transcribe all of the audio recording, and then what you get back is basically kind of a rough starting point for the words of your book. And obviously you need to do a lot of rewriting, because the way we say things out loud is very different from how we'd want to read it when it's written in fluent, coherent English. But you've got that structure, and then it's just a kind of case of wrangling with the words and kind of getting them into the right shape and the right structure. And so what Jez and I would do is we'd block out an hour to do a chapter, and we'd sit down in a little room somewhere in our WeWork, and set up a microphone, and I would have to ask Jez barely any questions, because he'd just be off for talking, and then I'd have to be like, oh, time's up, I can get it transcribed, and then I would take it away and turn it into a chapter, and he would give suggestions for how to make it better, and then it kind of sounds too good to be true, but it really, really worked.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about how long the whole process took, from the moment that you were given the chapter outlines by the publisher to pretty much when you had I'm guessing, does it work the same way as screenplays, where you have a first draft, but then the publisher will come back to you and you iterate a few more times maybe?
So we wrote a sample chapter back in, was it 2016, 2017? 2018. I'm really bad at...
Yeah, 18, I think.
So in November 2018, we wrote a sample chapter, and then based on that, the publisher said that they wanted to go ahead with it, and then we started in earnest in January 2019, and then we did half the book, and then we touched base with our editor around April 2019, and then we finished the whole thing by August, September. So that was the first draft, and then we did a few revisions, and then the whole manuscript was done by October 2019, I think. And then we kind of go into the fun stuff like typesetting and the design of the book cover, writing acknowledgements. Jez told me that I had to write some acknowledgements. He was like, you might only write one book in your life, so you've got to write some acknowledgements. But yeah, so it was under a year, just under a year, the whole process.
Wow. And how many hours a week would you say you were putting in?
Well, if we did, we'd probably take an hour to record one chapter. So there were about 14 hours of recording at least. And then it was about maybe half a day a week over the whole year. Maybe more like a full day. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is I know there's a lot of people probably on this call right now who either have written books, maybe want to write some more books or write their first book, and I thought this could be very useful information for them. I have one more question for you, April, before I turn it over and start involving Jez a little bit. The one thing that struck me that you said earlier was that when you went to work for Cowie Consulting, you said you learned more there, I think you said, in your first year than previously. And I'd just love to hear about maybe some of the insights that came out, maybe some of the scenarios that you were placed in that led to those kind of insights.
Well, I mean, in the book, so something that Jez talks about is when you do to think rather than think to do. So rather than kind of ruminating on something and making a plan and then kind of doing it, if you just kind of go in at the deep end and then you can kind of reflect afterwards, I think that's the kind of education that's the kind of way we learn at Cowie. But I guess it was a new way of thinking, a new way of kind of coming up with solutions that feels a lot more creative than when you're doing it in an academic setting. It was kind of, you go from when you're kind of studying in an academic setting, you kind of do everything on a computer or writing on lines, and then you kind of do it in the real world, and there's kind of post-it notes everywhere and big spider diagrams and lots of workshops and discussions. But I don't know about specific insights from my time in the first year. I mean, I guess just you learn by watching, don't you? So you're in meetings with people like Jez, and you just I learn by osmosis. I mean, so I find lots of the things I say, it's just Jez in my head.
We've got some good questions coming in on the chats as well, so keep those coming, and then we can get to those once we've had a quick chat with Jez. One of the questions I had for you, Jez, is I noticed that, and we see this throughout a lot of different behavioural science books as well, is they'll talk about trying a different cocktail of techniques out. In one we use the scarcity message, and one we use this kind of message, and then they try them all out and see which one does the best. Is there a particular approach you have when you want to try various different behavioural science techniques out, in terms of even like just selecting the right ones or knowing which ones to combine? Is there a kind of approach that you have that maybe some of us could learn from to use in our work as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think when I am practicing, I felt there was enough innovation in models and tools and frameworks already there that it didn't necessarily, and I still don't think it necessarily requires anything much more. So as April said, what we'd figured out, I think some of the things at Ogilvy, certainly the first two steps, we didn't do so well on the third, but just following sort of simple scientific method, which was sort of understanding the context in which you're operating in, and getting as many sort of primary or secondary sort of research inputs to that, such that you can understand the issue. And I know it's a big deal for Prakash and Reshma at 1001, but I'm a firm believer that you can't do behavioural science unless you are experiencing the environment in which you're looking to change the behaviour. And that is difficult sometimes. So, you know, I don't think you can watch a video of a pig abattoir and then design an intervention in a pig abattoir. I don't think you can do that. I think, you know, if you're dealing with people on probation, and people that have just got out of jail, then you need to be in the environment. I mean, you know, you can't be in the environment because you're not a professional. You're not a probation professional. So, you know, it wouldn't be fair for you to be in the room when they were having conversations, but you can listen to those conversations at the same time. You can sample the environment about what it's like to come into that environment and observe. So that's kind of like the first thing. And then starting to understand kind of like how a particular behavioural sort of model or theory might help you. So, you know, COM-B is incredibly popular at the moment. I think it's a great diagnostic tool, but it's not the only diagnostic tool. So, you know, I love the Triandis model. I think that's great, interpersonal behaviour. Sometimes the trans-theoretical model is helpful, even though it's been dissed by some of the professors. But I think clients quite like that still. I think so, you know, if it helps you get to a better place, then I don't think it's invalid. It might just be a bit of scaffolding that helps you get through. And then you go into the design phase, and that's when you get some interesting sort of frameworks. So, you know, I love Mindspace. I think incentives is a bit rubbish. Priming has been, you know, people get all bent out of shape on priming, and whether you should use it or not. But I think it's a good way to stimulate ideas. We talk about that in the book. But I think there's quite a few decent things out there in terms of kind of just messy creativity in the middle. And then the bit that we weren't very good at Ogilvy, because we were an ad agency and we weren't maybe as good academically, but as I said, now there's 22 people at Cowley far better than me. You know, strong experimental design, to make sure that you're controlling for those factors. So I think, you know, when you get to that place, that gives you a good base. One of the things that I just find incredulous sometimes is the expectation that one single use of a bias, or, you know, it might not be a bias, you know, it might be a principle, a behavioural principle, is going to absolutely nail the behaviour change problem. It's just high risk. So I'm a firm believer of essentially trying to understand kind of like a lot of different factors, maybe a few different steps, and then essentially putting some intervention in place that maybe touches 2 or 3 of those, uses a few of those kind of inputs, and then that's going to give you a better result. And again, we talk about that in the book, that I'm not in the game of proving that a psychological principle or a behaviour change model is going to work better. I'm there to change behaviour in a sustained, ethical way. I'm less bothered about, you know, which factors were more or less important, and in that process, which is heresy, I think, for some behavioural scientists. But I've never had a client say to me, within the piece of work that you do, can you isolate empirically the interrelationship and valence of all of the different factors? Because that's crucial to what I want. They don't. They say things like, when people ring up, I want to make sure they have a good experience and don't leave us as a company. Can you help me with that? So they measure retention, and I go, okay, that's fine. We'll measure that. So I think, yeah, I think use the innovative tools that the academic community has given us, and then practically apply them in the real world. And personally, I don't get so bent out of shape about those things, because that's ultimately not the aim.
Yeah, and actually, when you mentioned the first examples about, you know, the pig abattoir and just environments that are going to be very alien to the person who's trying to do the intervention, would you recommend maybe having partnering with somebody, maybe so rather than just placing yourself in that environment for a few days or a few weeks, is it maybe better to partner with someone that's in that all the time, and maybe the two of you can work together, maybe a strategy like that or something similar?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, you need to have people who are in that context day in, day out, because they say things and give you those you know, they don't realize their insights at the time. They just think that's what they do. And you often find that, you know, that there's people that are working in those environments that really want to do change things for the better. They've been hammering their head against the wall, and they tend to be kind of like you're part of the team. We have worked with some specialist consultancies. So we did some work in construction. We worked with a safety construction consultant, and they were very, very professional. But they didn't have the behavioural. I don't think they had the behavioural insight piece, and it felt quite rational and process driven. So it was helpful in terms of giving us the credentials and making sure we didn't sort of commit any sort of schoolgirl or schoolboy errors, and that was important to me, that I didn't want our first couple of interactions with the client to be poor ones, and then base their decisions off the back of that. So I think there's different people and different ways that you can draw partnerships that can help you ultimately achieve your aim. I'm a great believer in diversity, and all different types of diversity. But there are some things that have been solved by one person in life, but I think generally it's been a team effort. And I'm brilliant at doing some things, but bloody awful at doing a lot of things, as April will be testament. So it's good, really good to have people around you that are good at doing those things. So more the merrier, I think.
Yeah, and to that point, actually, and this is even the reason why I asked the question initially, is there was a book I read recently that it didn't claim to be a behavior change book, but nevertheless, it presented a really interesting framework that you could probably almost partner with some of the stuff in Ripple. The book was called Upstream, and they were looking at trying to solve problems in complex systems. And so for some of the examples, for example, were trying to get rid of homelessness. So they found a town where they completely eliminated homelessness. And then they said, okay, what happened here? Then there was another problem, like preparing for a hurricane. Well, they were really successful in this instance. What do they do? And then they tried to see if there were any patterns. And the first pattern, the first principle of their framework is called surround the problem, which is exactly what you said. You surround it with as many diverse lenses as possible so that you can see all of the different things that contribute to it. I think even one of them was like removing or lowering domestic violence. And so they were able to see all of the different players. And it could be something as simple as just making sure a police car drives by like once every hour. Just that trigger and cue in the environment was enough to lower some of the things. So if anyone is watching this and they're interested, I think looking at the toolkit in Upstream would probably work really well with some of the ideas in Ripple. I have some kind of fun questions for you guys now. I don't know what you'll make of these, but I'm going to ask them anyway. One of my first exposures to this world was through a man named Derren Brown, who I hope most people know, maybe some don't. For those of you who aren't sure who Derren Brown is, he manipulates people and manipulates their behavior. And one of the most impressive things he did recently was he manipulated someone into committing murder. Now, obviously, it didn't really happen. The person genuinely thought they were pushing somebody off a high-rise building, and then he walked you through all the techniques that he did to get up there. The most impressive thing I've ever seen from Derren Brown was where he manipulated a bunch of marketers to create a marketing campaign, which he'd already created. He put the ideas in their head. Jez and April, how much of that stuff do you think is real, and how much of it do you think is just showmanship? I want to believe it's all real, but I just don't know. So I figured maybe you might have some insights into that.
I'm a massive Brown fan, and I think that he is a really intelligent book. Actually, I think he's so clever. Like his book on happiness, I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. It's all about kind of the philosophy of happiness and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you've been thinking about this because did you watch his retrospective, which was on the other night? It was like a kind of his best bits. It's been like, it was like his 10 or 20 year anniversary or something, and they kind of did a recap of all of those things. And I must say that, for example, in the advertising one, I struggle to believe that all those, like he was basically claiming that he'd kind of placed all of these suggestions at various points on this advertising exec's journey to where they were filming it, so that he influenced them to do this. Well, it was an advertising campaign for a taxidermy company, right? It was something like that.
That's right, yeah.
And I I struggled to believe that he'd be able to have success with if he only did it that one time. So whenever I watch those things, I'm thinking, how many times did you actually have to do that to get that result? And I know with the pushing someone to their death thing, I think he reveals at the end that they actually ran that 8 times, which kind of gives an insight into how confident they were that they were going to get that result. So that kind of suggests to me that maybe they do all of these things multiple times as a kind of safety net, because this is the thing with nudging, right? Is that it's not everyone is equally as suggestible, and it kind of works when it's kind of taken at population level. There's kind of marginal percentage increases when you do it on a big population of people. So yeah, I wonder whether there's a lot of kind of replicating stuff if you're doing it on TV and it's not live. But then he does do lots of stuff live on stage, doesn't he? And that always works.
Yeah, he did one where he made a film. I don't know if you saw that one. And he had people go in and watch the film, and then they exited the cinema and they interviewed them and said, so what do you think of the film? Couldn't remember anything about it. It made them forget the film as they walked out. And again, I thought, and then they interviewed, I think they had like some people there from the academic world, and they're like, if this is real, he's at least 10 years ahead of the rest of us, because we don't know how he did this stuff. So anyway, maybe you guys at Cowrie could run that experiment, the advertising one. You could do a few different versions of it and see how it turns out and compare it to Darren's. That'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think there's enough bad advertising out there to not put any more out. I mean, seriously, I think because this does come up quite a bit. Is I think there's a danger that behavioural science can be presented as magic, and there are some people, I think, that do push that agenda. And I don't want to be associated with that. Now, I think behavioural science can be magical sometimes when you find a very, very elegant solution to solve a very, very gnarly, thorny problem, and it feels so simple in hindsight and retrospect. I think that's the critical thing, is that, you know, we're not shapeshifters, we're not mind benders, we're not manipulators. You know, what we're doing is designing the world for the way that makes it easier for the brain to make a better decision, and how that is defined by society and the rules and the regulations and the ethics that we have within our society. Yeah, I think I don't think it's as bad as it was when it was 10 years ago. You know, there was quite a bit of sort of snake oil and that magic sort of piece. And manipulate comes up quite a lot, you know, we do a lot around our ethics and our values, and I think it's really, really important. You know, for sure, sometimes, you know, there's some amazing things that behavioural science sort of uncovers, you know, it is magical, but it's not magic. So that would be my point.
Great. Well, I have one final fun question, and then I'd like to turn it back over to Prakash so we can go through some of the questions that have come in chat. My final question to you guys was, I really liked part of the book where you talked about the revelation of this particular version. Was it called like drunk wash pink or something like that? A shade of pink that completely tranquilizes people, and it lowers testosterone levels and stops people's heart rates getting up. That was interesting. But then I read from your summer schoolers, one of them gave some feedback and said they learned about color techniques on your program, and they actually learned that there were some other things going on there. So what other fascinating insights do you guys have about colors in the use of behavioral science, other than that really cool one about the tranquilizing pink?
I'll do a little bit, and then I'll let April follow up. I think when we did just kind of like a bit of a health warning, is the pink walls. We did 3 interventions in this construction site. One was a conversation that happened every morning around how to approach health and safety. Another one was we re-engineered the reward scheme. And then we redesigned the canteen and painted it pink. And all those 3 things went on all at the same time. We did phase them, but there wasn't any difference that we could see. And we saw this 82% reduction in unsafe behaviour with a 1 in 69 chance. It was due to chance on the P-score. The media, like myself and April, were on the Radio 4 on BBC, and they get excited by the pink. And you know, when we posted the case study up, we got quite a lot of positive stuff, but quite a few negative barragey type stuff about colour. And I think, you know, it's fair to say that I think colour it's not as empirical as some of the other biases by any stretch. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I think that's kind of like the health warning. But I don't know, April, if you just want to talk about maybe how we're using some colours in some of the UX designs that we're designing,
Sure.
like the platform.
Yeah. I think the thing with colour is that it can be quite dangerous, like Jez says, to make a really confident claim like purple definitely slows down our perception of time, or something. You know, it alters how we perceive time, and yet know that it might alter our perception of time. Then what would be the harm in putting like a really long form that people have to fill in a nice shade of purple and just, you know, see if it works? Like it's not gonna harm anybody. And yes, I mean, some really simple things that we find, which is really common sense and yet isn't common practice, is just thinking about the user experience of a page or a letter, and just thinking, well, which colours pop out, which bits attract our attention. So we work with one pension company, and they've got really nice pensiony type brand colours. So they've got this kind of rich dark navy blue, and then they've got a lovely bright golden yellow. And we do a lot of work helping them with things like forms and letters and stuff. And the brand guidelines have all of the buttons that they want people to click on, all of the calls to action are in dark navy blue. And we're like, change it to the bright golden yellow that you've got on your colour palette, because we know that it attracts people's attention more, and it's more salient. It pops out on the page, and if you want someone to click on it, it's going to be more like click on it. So it can be really simple things like that, and you don't have to make any bold kind of claims about. I mean, yeah, another one that we talk about in the book is all the psychology on things like the colour of plates and that affecting how much you eat. And even though it's kind of been it hasn't been able to be replicated, the fact that, you know, maybe eating on food decreases how much you eat, it's still like a really interesting idea, right? It's still an interesting creative starting point, and it's almost not going to do any harm to kind of try it out and experiment with it. But yeah, there are lots of really interesting insights like that we draw on.
Yeah, there was a book that was released maybe a month ago called Blind Sight, a marketing book, and they had a whole section about the color blue and how it traditionally, evolutionary, just turns us off, and so you don't want to eat as much. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, guys, thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Prakash, now, because we've got a lot of questions in the chat, so I don't want to take up any more time. It's time to get to those questions now. Over to you, Prakash.
Thank you, Michael. We have like some serious bibliophiles out here. They know all the good books. They all know the good. And we're lucky to have fantastic authors like Jez and April out here. Thank you again. Before we go out, a shout out to some of our members. Like, we all know Harmony. Harmony was from LA. She, SoCal. She's from Southern California. Was it LA? And then she moved to Barcelona.
San Francisco. Really important to make that distinction. Sorry. You know, growing up in San Francisco, we sort of learned to have a real bias against people from Southern California, sort of indoctrinated. You know, people in Los Angeles use all the resources, and, you know, we just have this. It's quite funny, actually. Northern Californians.
Yes, I remember SoCal. I'll remember it. If you ever go to San Francisco, get some flowers in your...
Absolutely, yes.
So Harmony is right now in Barcelona, as they would call it in Spain.
Yes.
And then we have Michael, we got Nuala, we got Sheena McDermott. A lot of us regulars out here. I do want people to also give a shout out to Lachija. And my bad, I just found out when Aditya told me literature is actually an evolutionary biologist, behavior scientist, sorry, and is almost about to be done with his PhD. So yes, we have podcasters in the group. We have people who are about to finish their first draft of the book. We have people with serious academic cred out there. And I think it just makes sense to see why Latches was very quiet and smiling when you're talking about the academic debate out there, saying PhDs versus non-PhDs, gatekeeping versus this. And we will also talk about those in details. Also, a big shout out to a couple of people from diverse background. We got Beneath, we got Sai. These are from senior leadership positions in India. And they have an uphill task in that they are big believers in behavioral science and behavioral economics. But there are also other stakeholders that they need to work with. So in a lot of developing nations, non-weird nations, when you have, so these are your first folks who are trying to bring in those changes, saying, hey, you know what, guys, like Jez says, and I hope they're going to use that line possibly in talking with their folks, saying, no, it's not magic, it's magical. I think we all are going to steal that line, guys. Feel free to steal. Okay, stealing is good. And then we got Sunil Vaya, we got Shyam. They just about started with their podcast sessions. All the best to them, guys. And then we have Apurva, who is actually, in fact, about to join Kauri. And a big shout out to her because she's starting this beautiful journey into the world of behavioral science. Is one of the best team in the world out there. Louise, all yours, all the questions out there. And Jez and April, if you want to talk about that bucket in Thailand, or if you want to talk about obesity in Mexico, or any other stories, feel free to tell us about it. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks very much. And I'm the unqualified monkey who's put in charge of all these great brains that I've got in front of me. So I had a question quite early on, and Jez, you might like to address this. And Nikki has asked us, have you heard of interesting ways at all that readers have already applied the insights from the book to different situations? Have you actually had any reader feedback, Jez?
We got our first 2-star review on Amazon the other day, so we were really pleased by that. So it makes all the 5 stars seem more real. So we were really pleased by that. And that was it. I suppose that we're fine. We were laughing about it, but it questioned it. Basically, they said we talked about the priming study about people being primed with slow elderly words and then timing their walk back to their desk. And we actually caveat it in the book and say, it was hard to replicate. And but it was funny. They said, I'm not going to read the rest of the book because priming isn't a thing. And we do caveat priming to go, it's the least understood and hardest to replicate. So that's maybe an example about someone who didn't have a good experience after reading the book. But I think priming's interesting. There's just more to understand, I think. The one thing, I suppose, going back to maybe Michael's question about when we wrote the book and how we wrote the book and why we wrote the book. We wrote the book because we didn't want to write another book which was a list of heuristics or biases done in an interesting way, because that had all been done. And we didn't want to come up with another book which just talked about one and went on about it. And what we wanted to do is essentially help people navigate the world of trying to get things off the ground. And I think that's really important because, all the other books have done and all the other studies have covered that off. So we've had quite a lot of people saying that they like the tips and the toolkits, and sometimes they're really obvious things, and we know that, but really, really important. Like, I think it's really funny. Like, you start off a workshop in a day with 30 people that have all travelled sometimes from around the world to join you for that workshop. And you, as a psychologist or applied behavioural scientist, that the primacy effect, that the first interaction that everybody has is going to anchor everyone's expectations and experience of the day. But you do it really badly because you're a bit hurried, you're a bit rubbish, you're not prepared, or you might just be a bit formal. You're not really thought about it that much. And sometimes those insights, I think are quite powerful, that you take an insight from academic work and then say, actually, you do need to apply it, because if you don't get this first bit right, then that's really important. The one thing that seems to be a little bit new, which I think, and April won't mind me saying this, But we went through the 14 chapters, and I kid you not, April wrote them so beautifully. They came through, and I just kept saying, wow, this is amazing. Literally no additions from me. When she said there was editing done, it was very, very minimal. But we had one chapter that we had to completely rewrite because we were a bit off that day. We were a bit distracted with our work, but we rewrote it. And it's the one which talks about the proofing ladder. I'd had a conversation with a behavioural scientist in New Zealand, and one of my friends, or kind of one of my colleagues from Ogilvy, had gone to New Zealand. She's now back in the UK, and I had this call with this guy and her, and they talked about proofing ladders. And I had this, honestly, I was like, wow, they must be a McKinsey thing. You know, I've never heard of that. That sounds cool. So I went on the internet and expected to see like the McKinsey study, the EY study, and all that sort of stuff. And there wasn't that much at all. If anything, it was just kind of an ethereal thing. So we rewrote the chapter and based it around a simple mnemonic about working your way up a ladder within an organization to get them on board with behavioral science, and then use obviously the letters. And we were really happy with every letter apart from the last one, which was growth, which was a bit of a fudge. But I think if there was anything that was new and interesting in terms of kind of, you know, a bit of scaffolding that can help you do stuff, I think the proofing ladder really, really does work. So certainly in a big organization, maybe not in a small to medium-sized enterprise, but I think that's where we've had some feedback. And then we had some other interesting feedback, which was, it's not really a book for startups. It's a book for big corporates. And I think that's fair. I think that's really fair. So, and I've not seen many Beh Sci books for startups. I think there's another book there if somebody wants to write it.
Thanks, Jez. And for anyone who hasn't read the book, as Jez was explaining there, it very much is a toolkit book. But you know, that doesn't mean that it's not, you know, a book for anyone to read. I absolutely loved it because the structure is so very welcoming to people who don't have behavioural science background. There's a glossary which gives you all of the terms, and then to me, Jez, it was actually more of a storybook because you tell the story of, you use the campaigns to illustrate. So they really resonate with you because immediately you're putting yourself into that practical experience of how you did it. So it's a great read. And of course, there's a link, isn't there, in the book, which gives you an amazing wealth of extra materials. Is that something that the publisher suggested, or how did you come about all this addition of this amazing wealth of extra stuff that you've given us?
I think, April, do you want to talk about kind of why we wrote the book in the way we did, and then also the toolkit and the website?
Yeah, having all of the stuff on the web on a website there from the very beginning, we knew that we wanted it to kind of come to life beyond the physical paper of the book itself. Because I mean, one of the things we talk about is the importance of bringing it to life, and we also talk about the importance of design and things like that in how we process information. And there are so many amazing videos that support some of the stories we're talking about. So we wanted somewhere for all of those resources to live, which is why we kind of created this online hub as like a companion for the book. I mean, I know that whenever I read a book and I'm interested in something, I'm always kind of Googling things at the same time, or I'm trying to know, find a video that kind of brings something else to life for me. So that's why we kind of put all of that together in that place. And yeah, as Jez said, the structure of the book as well, we kind of really thought about how do we reduce cognitive overload and improve the processing fluency of the book itself, because it would feel a little bit strange to kind of not practice what we preach when it comes to that. So we've kind of deliberately chunked stuff up into manageable sections, and we pulled out little key insights into kind of quote boxes, and then we've got all the key takeaways chunked at the end in a place that's easy to find. So the way we wrote it and the way it was typeset was kind of designed with the reader in mind to kind of improve the processing fluency. So I'm glad to hear you say it felt welcoming, Louise, because that was the intent.
I mean, I think it is quite interesting. Is Maybe people disagree, but I think there is a lot of behavioural scientists that actually don't practice what they preach. So what they do is they say, you should do this, and this is what you as society would be better, and then you actually see how they behave and how they communicate, and the assets they use, and it's not helpful at all. And I just find it really strange, like really strange. So I went to a presentation sort of recently, and it was by Prof. Schiller, who's one of my sort of real hero economics sort of profs. He's Nobel Prize winner, and I love his books, and I love him. He was just amazing, and his charts were just rubbish, and they weren't really formatted for the screen. They hadn't checked it, and yeah, you sort of go, it's a bit of a pratfall effect. Maybe he doesn't need charts, I suppose, but actually they were just all so wonky. It was just a bit like, and you sort of go, and that's kind of what I think, what I've sort of learned from maybe the seductive, influential, manipulative, even advertising world, is like the attention to detail on the experience you create, either for the customer or for the corporate or for the client, is so well choreographed. It's so well thought out. They're always thinking about how can this be like the easiest decision, or maybe the most challenging decision, but will give you the tools you need to make the decision. I just find it crazy. So I sort of it just seems a bit of an anathema to me. I think again, I'll say is I think sometimes it makes you sound a bit simple. And myself and April were conscious of that. We did a little video before the book launched, is to offset that a little bit, to say that if we did get any people coming through going, I've read the book, but it's just common sense and a bit simple and a bit obvious, and I read it really quickly, you sort of go, okay, well, that was kind of the point. Because if we create a book that takes you, hours and hours and hours, and you keep having to go back to it, and the typesetting's really small, the font's rubbish, it doesn't have any call outs, it doesn't actually chunk up the information, then actually I don't think you're doing as good a job. And so I think that's kind of sort of my view. And I know there's Nassim Taleb talks about, he quite likes having complicated charts because it makes people concentrate. So I get that too, but I think that's in the minority. So.
Thanks, Jez. I think that's the case of sort of like the thinkers and the doers. We have lots of very intelligent people in our agency, and they'll come and ask you what the clients requested, and it might be to interview taxi drivers, and you're like, how do you actually stay with a taxi driver long enough to interview them? You don't really think through the mechanics of it, or there's going to be a coach with Chinese tourists, and we want to interview them, and we're like, do you speak Chinese? Just the very basic questions don't seem to be asked. This is quite a difficult question, I think, Jez. I think I'll direct it at you. Sheena has asked us about you say in the book, the importance of giving people a taster of behavioural science in action. And without simply copying your examples, which actually might be a good thing to do, how would you advise someone who wanted to create that light bulb moment with a team?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about it a little bit in the book, and it's what we did at Ogilvy, and I think Dan Ariely is the best at it, is just using the illusions, using the psychological illusions that exist. And I don't think everybody's seen and experienced those yet. So, that could be the moonwalking bear, it could be the dollar, batting a ball, it could be those sorts of examples. So I don't think they're done and dusted. I don't think everybody's seen those yet. You just have to make sure your audience, you've asked them. So we often say to our audiences, like, which of these books have you read? And we're not actually that interested what books they've read. We're just trying to find out who in the audience has actually seen the next bit of content, and we can frame it in a way. The brilliant thing that to win over, like, sort of, business leaders, is actually taking a keen interest in some of their problems, and actually doing some small micro experiments. I think that's really fascinating. When we talk about it a little bit, we did a presentation to Nestle, and we did some experiments in some cafes in London and some cafes in Paris, and we videoed it. And I think that's the way that you get to it, is if you make it incredibly personal and relevant, and helping them solve some of their issues. So I think that would be my tact, would be bring it to life with something which is close to home, which again isn't necessarily that revelatory, but it really does make a difference, because I suppose it's Cialdini's liking principle. You're demonstrating that you like them so much that you've done some work for them, and therefore you like you back. So I think that would be it. Something that's business relevant. So so I think the example we had was trying to get people to buy sparkling water in a cafe, that was quite relevant. We looked at the portfolio, we looked to see what they said in their annual report maybe needed some help. We knew we had some intel, and then we did some experiments about how we might help that with like menu design and cafe design, and they would lean in from that point on.
Thanks, Jez. The next question I'm going to bring in is from Lashazar. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, Lashazar. You were asking about starting behavioural science in countries where it's still emerging. Would you like to ask that yourself, Lashazar?
It's fine by me.
Hi.
Thanks for the discussion up so far. So yeah, my question is, if you were about to start the behavioral science practice in a country where behavioral science is not yet so popular, what would you do? Because when I looked at the map of Europe, for example, I can see that there are quite a lot of consultancies that are concentrated in the UK, and then there are less when you move into Central Europe, and then there are even less when you look at Eastern Europe, for example, or for that matter, even some parts of Asia. So what would your first steps be, and how would you assess the market potential? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll go first, April, you can add. I think what I found is try and identify kind of a social or business problem that is just starting to loom, that isn't yet fully formed but is going to happen, and then start to do something in that space. It was interesting around COVID. I thought it was quite good for behavioural science in some ways, but there was a load of there was a lot of like, I don't know, behavioural science guide for COVID. I saw about 237 of those, and you sort of go, like, it changed every day. What was in those guides was relevant for the week that had just gone. So I think they were always kind of just playing catch up, and it didn't seem like it was that helpful. I think there was one COVID thing which was really good, which was for social distancing, which was it's like think distance, think cow. And essentially you should be 1 cow's distance away from people. I just thought that was brilliant. My favourite COVID intervention. Think about how big a cow is, and that's how far you should be. Maybe not relevant for some urban dwellers, but it works for most people. But so I would say, yeah, try and identify kind of something that is kind of happening. So, we've got flexible working, is a real conundrum about what's good and what's bad, and then sort of designing what that looks like. I think that doing some interventions in that space would be really, really good, because businesses are like, brilliant, amazing way to save money on office space, and people are like, brilliant, I don't have to commute. And then I think everyone's beginning to realise that actually they do like a bit of a mix, and actually their house isn't set up really that well for that. The broadband isn't so good, they don't have an office, they get interruptions, and people are dealing with some of those things, and that's kind of fine. But yeah, I think that's where I'd look. And then do something that is just, maybe a month ahead of everybody else. That would be my advice. I don't know, April, if you've got anything that you would consider.
I don't know if I've got advice other than just kind of dwelling on how it is definitely more of a challenge if you're trying to, like, it's one thing going in and selling your services to a new business, but it's another thing if you've got to go and sell behavioural science as a concept as well. So you're kind of having to advance it as a tool before you can go and sell yourself as someone who can help someone use that tool. So yes, certainly more of a challenge. I'd say that it only kind of feels like we're just starting to not really have to do that in the UK. Everyone kind of has a rough idea of what behavioural science is and how it can be used, and people have heard about the nudge unit and the government and stuff. But then on the flip side of that, I think it's also an opportunity, because you can go to a client and you can say, look, you can be the first one to use this amazing tool, and you can use this to amazing competitive advantage if you're the first person in there. So I think whilst it'll be more of a challenge to do it in a new market, a new company, it's also an amazing opportunity to bring that to clients and help them be the first movers there.
Thanks, April. I'm quite conscious of the time here. We've been here an hour 20, and it is Sunday, which seems even worse than when we keep you all on a Saturday. So I do want to thank you all for your time. I'm just going to put one more question. Hi, I can't see you waving, Prakash, don't worry. I was going to put one more question to Jez, if you don't all mind staying, and maybe Harmony, you'd like to ask your question, and it's sort of referring to the story, which you all know well, about the babies painted on the shutters, and you were using this really to reference the concern about businesses closing in the current crisis, which I think is quite a relevant question.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel the timeliness of COVID and what we're all going to be going through. Yeah, I was just talking to my boyfriend this morning who works in hospitality, and I mean, the writing is on the wall, so to speak. It's already there, just going through the center and in my neighborhood. It's just everywhere. So I think, he had actually gone to Seville a few weeks ago and was saying, wow, in Barcelona is pretty metropolitan. I want to find out ways that we can really tackle that, maybe from a public policy / neighborhood associations approach, because it is going to be an issue. It's already very apparent where I live in Barcelona. Spain has got a lot of, high percentage of restaurants, but I do think that this is going to be a global issue. So I just think that it's a perfect opportunity to approach these social problems with, the behavioral science sort of mindset. And I do want to rebrand it. I think it's a horrible name. I have to say that. But yeah, that's my question. How can we make sure our neighborhoods look great when half the businesses are closed? So that's my question. It's like maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there was I don't know if it was new to me, but I sense it's a new field. But there was a LinkedIn post that I kind of checked out that I really liked. I've not seen much in it. It was like sort of architectural psychology, like the psychology of architecture. And I know architects have most probably been thinking about some of those things. I just don't think it's been infused so much. So yeah, I think there's I think the great thing about Babies of the Borough was nobody wanted to do it. So we didn't talk so pushy in the book about it, but the local council didn't want to do it. So Tara, whose idea it was Tara's idea, with Dan's support, and Nicole, who was like a big champion of the idea. They just said, bugger it, we're just going to knock on these short storefronts and the shops on the street. And then they got those guys and girls on board. And so I think the challenge is, I suppose, using those case studies to demonstrate that kind of softer interventions can have a short, medium and long-term positive effects on society. I don't think the answer is just babies' faces. I think it might be different colours, as we discussed before, more access, more naturalness, more greenness, for sure. And I think it's the challenge will be trying to find someone that's got the resources and funding to essentially tackle that on a larger scale, because Babies was only one street. So I think that would be an amazing opportunity for a very, very forward-thinking borough or region to say, we firmly believe that the environmental sort of infrastructure has a massive effect on people's well-being, and we're willing to invest on some experimentation about how that would look and feel. And I think that would, going back to the diversity point, I think the big diversity of skill sets would be absolutely critical sort of within that. If you have designers, town planners, psychologists, behavioural scientists, all of that type of stuff. And then local people, because as you know, Southern California is very different from San Francisco. So, having those local people, there was some stuff that when we were designing the stuff for the pink walls that we really liked, because we've done some stuff in contact centres as well. And there was a psychological study which basically looked at 4 different ways in which you can design an environment, from like one extreme, which was, it's designed for you, you leave work on Friday and over the weekend it all changes. And that was the least appealing. The most appealing was you contribute to it and you feel part of it. So I think one of the key tenets of how you do that would be the local community is involved in all stages of the process. That would be absolutely critical. But yeah, I think, architectural psychology. There's another book there, I think.
Thanks very much, Jez. So I suppose it's just for me to say thank you to all of you for turning up. And I think you'll all agree we've had some really interesting insights from April and Jez. Might encourage a few of you to go out now and buy their book, maybe. And to thank Michael for his contribution to the group today with putting together the questions. And thank you to all of you who gave us questions, whose questions I called out. I'm sorry I couldn't read all of them, but we, as I say, are conscious that it's a Sunday. We don't want to keep you all away for too long. So I'll just say thank you to all of you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And just hand back to Prakash now for the final wrap up.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Michael. April and Jez, thank you so much. It means a lot to us. The thing about our group is we have people who are accomplished authors and podcasters out here. We have people who are PhDs, people who are studying their masters. We also have people who are just about starting their journey into this world of behavioral science. And it helps a lot to have the two of you and people like you come and talk to us, give us your the gift of time, like you told me, Jez, the other way. One thing which people do not know about Jez is, apart from being this fantastic behavioral scientist, apart from teaching students, apart from running this fantastic consultancy, being a nice friend, being a fantastic parent, Jez is also putting down this effort and time towards bringing the community together, the behavioral science community. One of the biggest complaints in the field of behavioral science is too weird. This whole field, we do not have diverse voices out here. And this is something which Jez has been hearing a lot about, I'm sure, because of which, instead of just saying, yeah, you're right, or a like on that discussion, which is how it typically goes, he said, let's do something about it. And he reached out to a lot of people around the world. He's put up a fantastic coalition of some like-minded people, put up a diverse group of behavioral scientists, behavioral strategists from around the world. And it's his idea and it's diversified. So watch out for more news on that. All the best to Jez as he puts it all together. April, thank you so much. Also, Jez has been very kind enough to say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to turn up at the Now Fest too, right? So it's next month, September 24th, 25th, 26th. Jez is going to be there and a lot more people from Africa, from Brazil, from Peru, from Argentina, from Mexico, from Iran, from Lebanon, from Bangladesh. Oof, that's something, right? So keep your eyes open and we'll next catch up with Jez at the Now Fest. Jez and April are on LinkedIn. They're pretty active. I don't think they will mind it if you write your questions. I had one more question, guys. Do you want to help me with that? I'm sure they will help you with that, guys.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and thank you all for joining us on a Sunday. It's been lovely to see your faces and your name, to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you for that, Prakash. And yeah, I think the Diversify initiative is really, really exciting. So to rebalance the world to encompass weird and non-weird markets and people that really care about these different cultural contexts is just absolutely amazing. So yeah, look out for that in the coming weeks and months. There's going to be more to come. So yeah, really exciting.
Thanks so much, Jez. Thank you so much, April. Thank you everybody who joined us today. Same place, different day, same time. Next week, Saturday at 4 o'clock, we'll all be gathering together. No celebrity authors, just all of us to chat privately about what we thought about the book of the month, Hooked by Patrick Fagan. And one of our members is again contributing, which is really lovely. Babs Crane is going to be contributing, giving us a short introduction and critique on the book as we open. So see you next week, Saturday at 4 o'clock. Bye everyone, and thanks very much.
Bye.
Louise.
Yeah, hi.